Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our year-long journey on Cox Campus. This is our final course or year-long journey webinar this year. And we are so excited that you all have come to join us as we talk about oral language and its link to literacy. So I'd like to introduce our facilitator to you for the day. We have with us Dr. Shurita Thomas-Tate, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to her. Dr. Thomas-Tate is an educator and a speech-language pathologist whose expertise is in child language and literacy. Her work focuses on the interaction of language and culture, as well as ways to support language and literacy development in children from diverse backgrounds. Dr. Thomas-Tate received her bachelor's in speech pathology from Southern University in Louisiana and earned both her master's and PhD from The Ohio State University. Dr. Thomas-Tate's work transcends academics and takes a community-based focus. She's an activist at heart, and she uses her work to strengthen communities' knowledge of language and literacy development and improve access to language and literacy supports. Her most recent effort, the UGIMA Language and Literacy Program in Springfield, Missouri, is a nonprofit that exists to connect, empower, and advocate for children and families around issues related to language and literacy and just education in general. She currently serves on the Board of Education in the Springfield, Missouri schools, and she serves on the board of the Springfield, Missouri branch of the NAACP. She has also been honored by her colleagues for her work in the community, and her most recent award being the Missouri State University Board of Governors Excellence in Public Service Award. Dr. Thomas-Tate's work aligns so well with the work of the Rollins Center and Cox Campus, and we are so pleased and excited to have her facilitate this journey with you on oral language and its connection to literacy. Dr. Thomas-Tate, the floor is yours. You're on mute.
Thank you all for having me. I am really honored to be here today. I really appreciate the work that you all are doing at the Rollins Center and helping out people in the community with regards to language and literacy, which is my passion. Stacey has already introduced me, and I won't go into any more than that, other than to say that I absolutely have a passion for literacy. And I have been known to chase children down and give them books just because I love books and literacy so much. And I want kids to have that love and passion for reading, which is, I believe, the foundation for lots of other learning. We won't take time right now to get to know you, but we are interested about who's in the room, and maybe when we watch this another time, we'll have the opportunity to find out more about you all. Today's focus is going to be on oral language across the curriculum. I'm focusing primarily on kindergartners through third graders. Our learning objectives include describing the development of early oral language skills in children, describing the relationship between oral and written language development, and developing ideas and strategies for supporting K-3 oral language skills for young children. So I want to start by talking about some of the taxonomies that we use in discussing oral language in young children. There are a number of ways that we generally talk about these particular skills. The first that I want to talk about is the major three categories of these systems that include oral language. These systems include speech. These interrelated systems include speech, language, and communication skills. And when we say language, we include literacy because literacy is a language-based activity. Speech is a common term that we use to refer to what's known as the technical, known more technically as articulation. It's the process of physically expressing a sequence of sounds through the process of hearing a message. We use our articulators to produce speech, our teeth, our lips, our tongues, etc., to produce speech. Language is shared meaning. It's agreed upon set of symbols that enable people to interact and communicate with each other. The core properties of language is that it's symbolic, it's random symbols, it has to be agreed upon and shared among a group of people, and it allows us to communicate our ideas and thoughts. The last piece of this interrelated system includes communication. And communication is a medium of interaction between people that allows them to direct the emotions and actions of others from hearing and receiving information. These three systems work together, and we're going to be focusing on language, but understanding that it also interacts with these other two systems. Within the system of language, we have these three language domains, which include content, form, and use. And within those three domains, we have these 5 language components. These language components include phonology, morphology, and syntax. And I'll define those in a second. And content includes semantics, and use includes pragmatics. These may be terms that you are familiar with, but I do want to go over them again because they are really important and foundational to what we will be discussing. Phonology is the sound system of a language, and every language has its own set of rules and sounds that are part of their system. The phonology is the rules that govern the sound combinations. It is at the basis of phonology is the phoneme. And the phoneme is the smallest unit of sound that carries meaning. And it's a unit of sound though. And so in the word cat, we have 3 sounds, k, a, t. Those are 3 different phonemes that are represented. Let's ask you all to think about this for a second. If I were to give you a number of words, I want you to think about how many sounds are in them. And we're going to talk about how that's different from the number of letters in them. How many sounds are in the word gum? If you said 3 sounds, then you are correct. How many sounds are in the word seed? If you said 3 sounds, you are correct, even though there are 4 letters. Let's try one that's a little bit harder. How many sounds in the word clock? If you said 4, you are correct, even though there are 5 letters or graphemes. So when we talk about the phonology, we're talking about the sounds of the words. And this is different from the individual letters of the words, but it's a very important piece of the language system. The next part that we'll mention is the phonology of a word. Phonology is the system that governs the structure of words and the construction of word forms. There are 2 different basic parts that we talk about with regards to morphology. The basic unit is the morpheme, and morphemes are the smallest unit that carry meaning. They aren't sounds in the same way that phonemes are, but they do carry meaning. So if we were to look at the word cat and then add a plural S, cats, it has 2 morphemes. The cat is the free morpheme, and the S plural is the bound morpheme. We have these bound and free morphemes. The bound morphemes have to be attached to a root word, and the free morpheme can stand alone. We also have these inflectional and derivational morphology types. When we talk about inflectional morphology, we're talking about suffixes, these word parts that we add to a root word that changes the tense of a word, like adding an ed or a plural s or present progressive s or an ing, for example. When we talk about derivational morphology, we're talking about words that we can add either a prefix or a suffix, where we are changing the word form or the word type. So for example, if we take the word teach, which is one free morpheme, and we add an ER to the end, which is a bound morpheme, we have a new word, teacher, which changes teach from a verb to a noun. Then we have syntax. Syntax are the rules regarding word order and word relationships with words within sentences. And we have some basic rules in English. Generally, we have a subject, verb, object sentence structure. But we have other languages that have other sentence structures. And we have other types of sentences that we can make in English also. But the basic structure that we're generally see in English is the subject, verb, object. The next category is content, and content includes semantics. Semantics includes the rules around word meaning and how we combine words for meaning. We can think about things about relationships between words, categories of words, literal and figurative meaning of words. All of this falls into the category of semantics. The next is use. Use includes pragmatics, and pragmatics includes the way in which the system that it combines all of these other parts of language components in functional and socially appropriate kinds of ways. And so we can think about pragmatics including things like social expectations, contextual variations, intentions behind messages, proxemics, things about how close we stand to people, or eye contact, and nonverbal kinds of language. There are lots of things that are included in this group, this particular piece called pragmatics. In the last piece that I want to talk about are communication modalities, and we have many different ways that we can express communication, including listening, speaking, reading, writing, signing, and thinking. These are some of the modalities that we use, these three interrelated systems of speech, language, and communication. So let's move on and talk about some of the early language skills of phonology that we see in children between kindergarten and third grade. By age 7 or 8, most children have mastered the production of English phonemes. So when you talk to a 7 or 8-year-old, they sound, their phonology, speech system, sounds much like adults. However, there may be some children who continue to develop some of their phonology skills into 5th grade. There are some sounds that we find that are later developing for some children. These may be harder to produce in English, such as the S and the Z sound, and including also the R and the L sound. So we do find a lot of individual variability in the ages that children acquire these individual phonemes or speech sounds. One of the very important skills that are necessary for in oral language development is phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is an umbrella term that talks about one's awareness of the segments within words and sentences. So we know that words have individual parts. When we talk about the individual sounds in words, we're talking more about phonemic awareness. But phonological awareness can extend to a more broader area of having word awareness, or having syllable awareness, or having onset rhyme awareness. All of that is included in phonological awareness. And we'll talk more about phonological awareness because it's one of those very early skills that we can have big bang for our buck with regards to working on children's early phonological awareness skills to improve their later literacy skills. One of the things that we know about phonological awareness is that there's a relationship between a child's phonological awareness and their alphabetic knowledge, or the alphabetic principle, which is their understanding of the phoneme-grapheme relationship. We kind of started talking a little bit about this earlier when we looked at the difference between the number of sounds and the number of letters in a word. So if we were to look at a word like the word brunch, we have 6 letters in that word, but only 5 sounds. So it's important for children to understand that the letter A makes a sound, the letter B makes a sound, and the letter C makes a sound, and that the sound and the letter are 2 different things. That's called the alphabetic principle. And it's a very important principle to work on with young children as they are moving or transitioning into literacy. Combining the alphabetic principle with phonemic awareness instruction is key. And research demonstrates that when we pair these 2 together, we have better outcomes for children. I'll just mention here, and we'll talk a little bit again about this a little later, that phonological awareness is one of the best predictors of later literacy skills in children. So what children are producing in, what children's skills levels are in the early grades, like 1st grade and kindergarten, is reflective or is predictive of their later reading skills by 3rd and 4th grade. So it's a very important skill for us to work on in the classroom. The next oral language skill that we'll talk about is morphology. When we think about morphology, again, we're talking about those word parts. In the pre-kindergarten period, prior to kindergarten, children are really working on developing their basic underlying grammar. And when we talk about their basic underlying grammar, we can generally think about Brown's 14 grammatical morphemes. I've included that table here for you to see. These 14 grammatical morphemes both help children to increase both their vocabulary by adding word parts, their morphology, and their syntax. And so oftentimes when we talk about grammar development, we're talking about their morphosyntactic development, the combination of their morphological knowledge and their syntactic knowledge, which we'll talk about in the next slide, that helps increase their skill in these areas. When we look at Brown's 14 grammatical morphemes, we expect that most children will have mastered these by the age of 5. Many children start to produce these as early as age 2, but will master them by age 5. The earlier developing skills are at the top of this chart. That includes the present progressive ing, prepositions in and on, and the plural s. And the later developing grammatical morphemes include the uncontractable auxiliary, the contractible auxiliary copula, and the contractible auxiliary s, apostrophe s. These all are important foundational morphological skills that children will develop that will, again, help with their syntactic knowledge, their vocabulary knowledge, and their morphological knowledge. And while I have talked about those 5 parts of language separately, I want you to always remember that they work together. They're interactive and they work together. When we think about our kindergarten through 3rd grade children, after they have mastered these grammatical morphemes, they are also working on developing more mature word endings and beginnings, those prefixes and suffixes, which are, kind of the core of our morphology. They will be learning things like inflectional morphology, like the plural s, the past tense ed, including the superlatives of er and comparatives of er and est. They will also be adding more derivational morphology to their vocabulary, and that enables them to produce more words in their vocabulary. Word parts like the con and the con and in at the beginning of the words, and shun and able at the end of words. The next early language skill that I want to talk about is syntax. When we think about syntax in this particular age group, we're thinking of children who are already producing longer sentences than the 2-word, 3-word that we see in early language development. These children have sentence lengths that are probably equal to many adults. But during this period, they are increasing not just in the number of sentences that they're using, but also in the types and structures that are included in those sentences. So they are moving from making mostly declarative types of sentences to also adding interrogative, imperative, and exclamative types of sentence types. They are also adding in simple sentences, compound sentences, complex and compound sentences. They are learning to use sentence in different kinds of ways. In addition, during this period, children are starting to add in cohesion words and coordinating conjunctions. You guys might remember those fanboys, those coordinating conjunctions, such as next, then, so, because, but, then, and when. These allow for them to do those compound and complex sentences as they learn and add these words into their repertoire. They are also starting to master negative sentence types, both with regards to adding the no and also adding the contraction for don't and would not and can't. When we think about this particular stage in development for young children, there is oftentimes a greater awareness or comprehension of skills than they often have a larger comprehension than they do production. So comprehension precedes production in their development of these skills. One of the other things that they're working on in this period is their passive sentences. And during this period, I mentioned the comprehension versus production because children often are able to comprehend these before they're able to produce them. Next, we have semantics. Semantics plays a huge role in early language development and also transitions to literacy very, very strongly. During the kindergarten to third grade period, we know that children have a huge vocabulary spurt. Their vocabulary increases in both breadth and depth. Breadth, how many words they know, and depth, how much they know about these different words. The size of children's vocabulary during this period is highly related to their experience with word and word exposure. Some of you guys may be familiar with the work of Hart and Risley, which people talk about a lot with their research. They had a book called Early Vocabulary Experiences in Children. And in their research, they talk about vocabulary development. And one of the big findings that people have talked about for years in their studies has to do with the amount of words that children heard in those first 3 years of life. So children from middle income homes in their study heard almost twice as many words during those early years. And it resulted in vocabulary differences later in those kids. By the time they started school, the kids who came from higher income homes had almost twice the size vocabulary of kids who came from more low income words. So this becomes very important when we think about how to prepare children for school and how to prepare children for literacy instruction, because that vocabulary plays a huge part of their early literacy experiences. And we're going to talk later on about some of the ways that we can work to help improve the vocabulary of children. And one is we got to get children involved with vocabulary development earlier, and we got to get them experiencing more vocabulary, more diverse vocabulary. And we can do some of this through working with not just vocabulary, but doing things like we talked about in the previous slide on working on their morphology skills. When children are in that kindergarten through third grade period, a lot of their lexicon expansion comes through literate vocabulary experiences. So they are learning new words through their experience with books. Books in the school and books in the home play a huge role with vocabulary development. Children during this period are learning about the multiple meanings of words. They're learning that words that they already have in their lexicon have multiple meanings. They are learning things like humor with vocabulary, learning that words can be funny, and that when we know that words have multiple meanings, that adds to its humor. I don't know if you've ever heard jokes of kindergartners through third grade, but they're pretty silly jokes, but oftentimes they are based on the fact that they are learning that words have more than one meaning. Children during this period are using verbs that express communication acts such as telling, saying, talking, thinking, remembering, forgetting, wishing, and guessing. And they are using terms that are related to these communication acts to express those things. And so those vocabulary words are also going to be adding to their experience with language. Children's early definitions of words often is a synonym for a word. So they often provide a synonym rather than an adult-like definition or a dictionary definition. And so during this period, particularly these early school experiences, they are learning to expand on meanings of words that they already know by expanding their definitional properties and being able to provide not just a synonym, but also a more adult-like or dictionary definition. In this period, you guys have probably heard about things like fast mapping. And fast mapping happens when we have minimal exposure to words, but we add them to our repertoire, often without much depth. It increases our breadth, but not our depth so much. And so during this period, it's important that children are also experiencing what we call slow mapping, or multiple exposures to words, and lots of discussion around these words so that they have this extending mapping experience so that they can increase their depth of knowledge of words. Things about how the word is pronounced, how the word is spelled, how to use the word, some of the nuances and differences between words, multiple meanings, etc. Also, children are adding spatial and temporal terms and other dietic words that change with regards to the usage and position and who's talking and when they're talking, etc. And that's also a very important part of their vocabulary development. This vocabulary development plays a huge role when they're starting to learn to read with regards to reading comprehension. The last of the 5 parts of language that we'll talk about is pragmatics. And when we think about pragmatics, again, we're talking about some of the social purposes of language. And One of the really important things that happens with regards to pragmatics is their increase in their ability to tell stories. And we call that narratives, these narrative developments. I've included a table here for you all to look at on some of the different stages of development that we talk about with young children in their development of narratives. In the beginning, they are not developing narratives that you and I are used to. Their narratives often are going to be grouping unrelated ideas and topics and switching between ideas. They're just keeping things along. The goal is for them to get to more true narratives that includes the kinds of things that we're used to seeing, a problem that happens at the beginning, some kind of action that happens to solve the problem, and some kind of resolution. We call that an episode. And in those episodes, that's a kind of the core of a true narrative. And children develop that skill over time. And by the time they're in first grade, they are getting pretty good at developing those narratives. We talk in narratives, we think in narratives, and our understanding of narratives, again, aids in our comprehension. When I think about pragmatics, and while all 5 parts of language are culturally driven, I want to mention how pragmatics in particular are culturally driven, even in the ways that we tell stories. Children have to learn how to code switch. They have to learn how to use language in ways that are appropriate for the environment that they're in. We all do it. We use language differently with our friends than when we're teaching or working or talking on the phone. And children also have to learn how to do that. They have to learn to use language in the way that the schools are expecting them to use language, for written language versus oral language, for formal versus informal kinds of settings. And so that process is called code switching. And most children learn the culture of school within the first couple of years of school experiences. And so it's important for some children for them to make some of these rules more explicit. Some children come to school with these pragmatic language skills that match that of the school. And some kids come to school with pragmatic skills that do not match. And when those kids have those matching skills with the school, they're at an advantage. But this doesn't mean that children who don't have those matching skills can't gain those skills. And part of that is for us to make some of these things explicit. Oftentimes we do learn pragmatic skills through implicit kinds of interactions, but we can make it more explicit. During the kindergarten to 3rd grade period, children are learning to master their conversational skills, turn taking in conversations, maintaining topics, and a very important one, repair strategies. So when they are having a conversation and they are talking, they can repair their words so that their listeners can comprehend fully. Also, they can ask for clarification when they are not comprehending, and these are very important skills. The last thing that I want to talk about here is metalinguistic awareness. This is the ability to think and talk about language outside of its usage. And it's also a very important precursor to literacy, as it helps set the stage for their interaction with more decontextualized language. One of these types of metalinguistic skills that we talk about is theory of mind. And theory of mind is a child's development of understanding that their listeners and their communication partners don't share the same thoughts processes as they share. As we move to more literate language, children have to gain that extra knowledge about decontextualized situations. So this leads us perfectly into our discussion about the relationship between oral and written language. Oral and written language both share one thing. They're both parts of language. However, they also differ in some very concrete ways. When we think about oral language, we are oftentimes talking about things in the here and now. We're talking about what's happening, things that we've experienced, that we can touch, that we can feel, that we know about. This is very different. This contrasts with written language, where we may have not the same level of conscious awareness of our environment. And oftentimes in written language, we are talking and thinking and learning about things outside of the present, things that we may not have experienced before. Oftentimes in oral language, because we're talking, we're going to use familiar vocabulary. We're not going to take a risk to use vocabulary that we're not familiar with. This is very different from written language, where we are challenged to use less familiar vocabulary. We choose to use a thesaurus, where we can learn to use different words, so that we don't repeat the same words over and over in written language. This is very different from oral language, where we can use the same words over and over. Oral language provides for a lot more redundancies in expression. We include our facial expressions and our hand gestures and other non-linguistic or extra-linguistic information like prosody and tone. How many times have you experienced something like sending an email or a text where somebody misinterpreted because they couldn't read your tone in the written text? That's how one of the ways that oral and written language differs. In oral language, we can add that extra redundant information on top of our words to provide more information to our listener. In written text, a lot of the information is embedded directly into the text, and it lacks some of that extra linguistic and non-linguistic information. And so there's more opportunity for misinterpretation. We use more familiar syntactic structures in oral language, and we're going to use less familiar syntactic structures in written language. We have different ways of using syntax in oral language. We use more subject to verb ordering, and we use more right embedding of making the sentences longer from the right side versus the left side in written language. We may use more object first sentences in written language, or more passive language in written language. We often leave information out in oral language. We call those ellipses, those dots that we sometimes also use in written language, but it's a little harder to use in written language. We are making our language more explicit in written language in order to not have misinterpretation or in our written language. We often do cohesion or making things flow by tone in our oral language. And in written language, cohesion is done through these linguistic markers like next and also and therefore and those other types of conjunctions that we've talked about. In oral language, we're communicating with another person directly, so we have more symmetrical interactions. In written language, our audience is much larger, or our audience can be different, and we may not even know our audience. And so there is often some asymmetry in the interaction because we don't get the immediate feedback from our listeners. And one of the other important final things I want to mention is the ability to request clarification in oral language that we don't have the opportunity to do in written language. So there's little to no ability to request for clarification unless we respond later to another written opportunity. So again, I just want to say that while oral and written language share in language, they also are very different. Oral language happens pretty naturally. Most children, given the right environment and the right biological structures, are able to develop oral language without much teaching. We facilitate language development in most children. However, written language requires us to instruct children and to develop written language skills. So I want to move on to our discussion on this relationship between oral and written language. And this Scarborough's reading rope may be something that you may have seen before. We talk about it lots in education and reading circles. And it is something that I want you to hold on to very closely, because this is going to provide you the bulk of what you need to know of how to support children in their language and literacy skills. First of all, I want to go to the bottom of the slide and look at the simple model, the simple view of the reading. This particular simple view of reading says that reading is the product of decoding and language comprehension. There's two parts to having reading. Reading's goal is comprehension, and it includes the decoding part and the language comprehension part. Let's go back to our 5 parts of language. We talk about those 5 parts of language. We have phonology and then these other 4 parts. Phonology represents that decoding part, and language comprehension includes those other 4 parts that we talked about. Let's look up above and we can look at the same thing of the 2 parts of the rope. The first part of the rope is the red part, the language comprehension part. It includes those 4 parts of language that we talked about: morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. That is a part of that language comprehension of on the red rope. The blue part of the rope, word recognition, matches with that decoding part in the simple view of reading, which is that first part of the 5 parts of language. This is very important. When we think about children who are language impaired, often children who are language impaired will later have difficulties in reading. Why? Kids who are language impaired have difficulties in all 5, may have difficulties in all 5 parts of language. This means that they're going to have difficulty at least with one strand, if not both strands of the reading rope. Kids who are dyslexic, however, often have difficulty in the classic dyslexia, have difficulty with just the blue part, that word recognition decoding part, the phonological basis of language. That's the part that kids who have dyslexia may have difficulty with. Not to say that they're going to have all of the parts of the red one together also. This rope is really important because it helps us to understand the process of learning to read and the strategies that we are using to learn to read. If we look at this particular rope, we can see that when we look at the blue rope helps students to become increasingly automatic or fluent in their reading over time. As beginning readers, it is important that they attend to that phonological aspect of reading. And this is a very important thing, particularly for children who come from underrepresented and under-resourced populations. You may be familiar with the reading wars, and they're kind of back in those reading wars these days, thinking about how to approach the reading process with children. And one approach looking at the blue rope, and the other rope looks at the red rope. Well, what we know in research is that all children can benefit from approaching reading from the blue rope, and only some children can benefit from learning to read from the red rope approach. And so why would we give all children the red rope only when we know that all children will meet the blue rope and only some children will benefit from just working on the red rope alone? When we talk about the red rope is the language comprehension part. It includes background knowledge, vocabulary, all of those 5-part language structures, well, mostly the 4 parts, but some of the 5 parts, verbal reasoning, which includes metaphors and inferences, and literacy knowledges, those concepts about print. When children are developing their language comprehension skills, over time, they are becoming increasingly strategic in their approach to reading. And together with both ropes, we have children who are both strategic and automatic in their reading, which is what we want for fluent reading that aids in comprehension. So oftentimes when I talk about these particular ropes, a lot of people can understand what it looks like to read from the word recognition rope, but not from the language comprehension approach. So let's look at an example. This is an example of these reading strategies that I want to mention. There are 2 approaches. We have the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. The bottom-up approach is the approach of instruction and the way that we attack reading that focuses on decoding and encoding. That is sounding out words and making meaning from sounding out those words, and also work on learning some pattern recognition. We call that phonics to some degree. And many of us learn to read from that particular strategy. We start sounding out words. Over time, we may switch to a more top-down approach where we use more background knowledge and we use previewing and predicting of words and guessing from context. The reality is that if we were to think about how we read, many of us do not read bottom up anymore. Let's look at this little example that I took off the internet. You may have seen this go around over social media. This particular image includes numbers, letters, and other images, symbols that are not words in the way that we see them. However, if you take your time and look over this, you can use your background knowledge, your previewing and predicting skills, and your guessing and context information to figure this out. I'm going to give you a minute to figure this out. Go ahead and look at it. So how is it that you were able to figure this out? You were able to figure this out not from decoding. You can't decode this because we don't have the key for this decoding system. We don't understand, well, we have the key internally, and we're going to use some of our background knowledge to do this and our context of language. So all that we know about language helps us to figure this out. And so that is kind of a visual representation of what this bottom up and top down processing, and this processing also relates to how we instruct and teach children. And again, here, my perspective is I am promoting a bottom up approach for most children, if not all children, as a core of moving up toward top down. Top down can come later. So well, we're going to go back up here, and I'm going to show you this just quickly. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here because I want to give you time to talk about some strategies. And so I just wanted to provide you with some information about what reading development looks like in those early years. The emergent literacy period starts before kindergarten. Children are learning print awareness and letter sort sound correspondences as early as preschool, if not earlier these days. We were pushing it back and back. By kindergarten, children are often in the alphabetic phase where they are doing more phonics instruction. Again, when we talk about phonics instruction, we're talking about letter sound correspondence, not just the phonemes, not just the grapheme, but the relationship between phonemes and graphemes. They are starting to do what we call early decoding. Early decoding is really just blending those sounds that they are learning. It's a phonological awareness skill, one of the later developing ones. By third and fourth grades, children are moving into the orthographic phase where they are shifting from learning to read to reading to learn. You guys have heard this all the time. This is where we see a big drop off in performance of kids, particularly those kids who had early language disorders. Those kids may have received speech therapy in those early years. And during this period, when that shift happens, those kids who have language difficulties may have reading difficulties. Remember, reading is a language-based activity that includes all 5 parts of language that we talked about. And so those kids who had language problems early on may have later reading problems and have difficulty with this shift. The process that we're hoping to happen for these children is that automaticity and fluency that we saw in the previous slide. We want that to happen for them, which means they have to become more strategic and more fluent over time. All of this will aid in their comprehension. Children who are more fluent in their reading are also better at comprehending. By the time we are mature readers, like you and I, we use very little cognitive energy for pronunciation. We recognize words rather than read those words. We read in a top-down kind of process. We process information for reading very quickly and automatically. And reading is primary way that adults increase their vocabulary and knowledge over time. And for children, it's also an important part for vocabulary development. Okay, this is my last slide. And I just want to end here by saying that how do we support oral language for language skills in our early learners for literacy? We focus on those 5 parts of language. And that's how we do it. We focus on those 5 parts of language. And I wish I had the opportunity to interact with you guys directly about this, but let's just look at these 5 parts and talk about how do we support literacy development by focusing on language, the 5 parts of oral language. The first one is phonological awareness. And this one's going to be the one that gives you, again, the biggest bang for your buck for supporting children's later developing literacy skills. We are going to want children in the phonological awareness sphere to have knowledge of words, where the beginning of the ending of a word starts. We want them to have knowledge of syllables, where syllable parts are, onset and rhyme. We want them to understand the onset and rhyme. And we also want them to have phonemic awareness where they can identify the individual sounds in words. That is the basis of decoding. It is blending those sounds that they are able to hear. So how do we do this? There are a number of activities and there are any number of programs out there, and I won't promote any one program because there are lots out there and many of them are very good. What we want to work on with children, the 2 most important skills that they need for later reading are segmenting words and blending words. Segmenting words and blending words. Segmenting is, we can start with initial sounds, then move to final sounds, then medial sounds. Excuse me. We can ask children things like, what's the beginning sound in cat? What's the ending sound in cat? What's the medial sound in cat? Understanding those segments and being able to blend them is important. Also asking kids, what word is this? B, a, t. And then they would say bat because they can hear the blending of those sounds. Also working on things like counting syllables, segmenting sounds by words. There's a little activity that I like to do with kids. It's called a sound string. And I take a string and I put beads on it. Let's say we put 5 or 6 beads on there. And for every sound in a word, the child has to move a bead to represent a sound. You can do this with a number of things. I've done it with pennies. I've done it with blocks where I place them in front of the kid. Even for children who don't have all of the letter sound correspondences down yet, we can do it together where we move something physically to represent each sound. Your goal with working on phonology is helping children to have very concrete knowledge of their letter sound correspondences and to have really good listening skills for those individual phonemes and sounds. And and their ability to identify them and to write them, because that's a part of this written language development piece. For morphology, I like to use a number of different activities to help children with their morphology. One is helping children to understand root words. What is the root word and what are the parts that are added to it? We can talk about the prefixes and the suffixes, but we can give them the words like hopeful and sleeping and careful and powerful, and ask them to identify the word parts, the root word, and what was added to it. Then we can take that part that we added to it and make new words. And children are learning to create vocabulary. They are gaining depth of knowledge of vocabulary by working on this morphology. And it's going to aid in their reading fluency when they know these word parts. Another activity for syntax that we can talk about, we can help children develop syntactic knowledge by doing sentence sorts. You've seen those magnets that they have for refrigerators where children can take words and make sentences of them. We can do this. We can make sentences from word parts, or we can do closed tasks where we leave word parts out and have children fill them in. They need to understand where verbs go. They need to understand where who we're talking about in those sentences when we change them from passive to active sentences. So we can talk about all those kinds of things, and we can mix these sentences around and make them and create them in different kinds of ways. For vocabulary, there are so many ways to work on vocabulary, and actually working on their morphology, working on their syntax is also going to work with their semantics. I am a fan of making vocabulary come alive through drawing, through acting, through multiple modalities of writing and thinking and singing and making it visual. So oftentimes with words, I'll make a word chart for kids, and they'll have the word there. They will draw a picture of the word. They'll give a synonym of the word. They'll use the word in a sentence, and we may even have them act it out. Giving them the opportunity to think about relationships between words, looking at word webs and categories of words. All of that is important for helping to build the vocabulary that is necessary for later literacy skills. And finally, pragmatics. With regards to pragmatics, it's about understanding the formality versus informality of language, as well as getting a really good handle on that story grammar. And not just story grammar. I didn't mention expository text, but there's also an internal structure to expository text. That's a whole nother lecture, but for this one, we'll talk about those narrative skills, that story grammar, helping children to identify the parts of a story and to retell stories and to write stories is an important part of helping them to learn how to comprehend stories. That's really the goal of reading. So these are just a few of the activities that I can talk to you about. I hope to have an opportunity to talk to you guys about more activities. That's the fun part. I'd love to hear about what you're doing in your classrooms and ways that we can support oral language skills, particularly for children who don't come to school with the same oral language expectations that the schools are expecting, how to support those skills for later literacy skills. So I'm going to end with some questions and give you the opportunity to ask me questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas-Tate. This was so informative. I do have a few questions, only a few to get us going. But again, I would like to, like you, find out what other questions folks have out there, specifically applicable to their classrooms and things that they've done or that they've noticed. So I'm going to kick it off. As you were talking about students who may come from a different language background, is there, I don't want to say there's just one thing, but is there something that you recommend that teachers do that can support those learners, that can hopefully support all learners?
Yes. So I didn't mention particularly I didn't mention this activity. It's called word sorts. And I'm a big fan of word sorts. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but in word sorts, it's a discovery process of learning where you give children a set of words on index cards, and these words can be fit into two different categories. So for example, let's talk about the use of the copula is and are. So we know that the use of is and are is often different for children who come from certain language backgrounds, such as African American English. So they may not change the verb usage in the sentence when it's expected to be changed. So for example, they may say, we is going to the store versus we are going to the store. And so what we want to do is not to make children think that this is a bad thing, because it's a valid part of language for a particular context. But the context of school, we expect them to use it in a different kind of way. So we use these word sorts to help children to start to understand and recognize these differences and when to use them. So for example, we could have a set of sentences on these cards, some that have is and some that have are. Or we can even leave it as a closed activity where there's a blank for the is and the are, and have the kids try to figure out, without your help, in groups. It works well when kids work together on this activity to sort them into two different categories. Ideally, they're going to sort the ones that should be is in one and the ones that are in another column. Then you have an open discussion with the kids of why they put those in those columns. Then you can talk about the other words in those sentences or in those structures that aid them in helping them to figure out which one should be used, is or are. So what we want to do is really to facilitate their ability to code switch. And code switching is important, not as a marker of their intelligence or their lack or anything, but another option. We all do it. We all code switch. And so what we can do for children is not to point out their differences as errors, but to point them out as opportunities to have another skill. I work with one of my former doctoral students, Dr. Lakeisha Johnson. We created a program where we help children to think about different kinds of language as being formal versus informal, where we talk about formal language, so home language versus school language, and both are good, both are right, but one is expected here and one we don't expect here. That way we can help those children who don't come to school with the same language experiences as other children to start to have more explicit knowledge about how to use and what's expected with those language skills. These kids are hearing it, but for some kids, they need explicit instruction on or explicit opportunity to learn how to do that code switching.
Awesome, thank you. I love your use of explicit. There's some things that can just be gathered by osmosis, but there are other things that have to be explicitly taught if you want them to be successful. So thank you for that. Let's see if we have time for one more question. And I think my last question is, how can teachers kind of survey or examine the different language development skills that their students may have?
So, when I work with my graduate SLP students, we use state standards, and every state has their own set of learning standards as benchmarks of expectations of what children should be doing with regards to their oral language skills. So if you look at the English language arts standards for your state, those are your ideas about what children should be doing with regards to language. If they have those language skills, we can talk about how those language skills are going to support their literacy skills. So we always want to work on oral language before written language, or oral language and written language together. They have to have those structures in their oral language before they can use them in their written language. So it's important that we give children the opportunity to talk and think and share in addition to writing. So we're going to do those things together oftentimes to support their oral language skills as we're working on that written language skills too. I'm not sure if I answered your question fully.
No, you did, and in just enough time, because we are at 4 o'clock. I don't know if anyone else had any questions. I didn't see any, but please feel free to write your questions and post them in our groups, either on Facebook or some of our other social media outlets, as well as on Cox Campus. You can also, if you would be so gracious, to fill out the poll at the end. And one of our goals is to be able to have this posted so that folks can review later and we can continue the discussion. Dr. Thomas-Tate, we're so appreciative of you showing up for us for this last year-long journey at the end of a long but strong school year that I know our teachers have had this year. And we are so looking forward to you continuing on this journey with us and hopefully coming back again and providing our teachers with some input that they could use.